Welcome to Illinois Lawmakers' continuing coverage of the spring session of the Illinois General Assembly during the month of May here on public television. I'm Jack Titchener, along with my friend and colleague Bernard Schoenburg of the State Journal-Register here in Mr. Lincoln's hometown. Good
nice
to have
be
you
here.
back, sir.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you.
Big news this week out of the Senate. The progressive income tax comes over here in 3 bills, passed out pretty much on party line votes. Well, totally on party line votes for the big vote on the progressive income tax.
Right. And that just shows that the Democratic Party is still behind the governor. People have been wondering as we get into the last 5 weeks of the session. It's less than that now, right? It's about that. If he will have the political capital left to get big things done. One of the things he has wanted to get done as a precursor to other things is get this constitutional amendment on the ballot, which won't be voted on by the public until November of 2020. But the Democrats in the Senate certainly held together on the main bill.
Big question now is what's going to happen here in the House. They have, Democrats have 74 votes, Republicans have 44. GOP said no way, no how. Right. Can they muster all the 71 they're going to need because they have some Tier 1 targets? And
they have targets. They have people who were elected possibly because of a reaction to Donald Trump in particularly some suburban areas that may lean more Republican. And Democrats were elected for the first time in a while. My guess is the governor will be putting pressure on this. This reminds me a little of when there were some people that had to vote on a budget after a 2-year impasse under Governor Rauner, and there were some people who took some very hard votes. I think that there will be pressure exerted to try to get at least those 71 votes they need out of the 74. I guess given the way things went in the Senate with kind of a strong show of support from the Democrats, good things said by the governor, despite Republicans saying, oh, this is really going to be eventually a tax on the middle class, and outside groups like the Illinois Policy Institute saying the same thing. Governor is helping fund that Think Big Illinois group that's been advertising on non-public television and making the case that only the rich will pay more. You can argue that that'll send people out of the state. There are arguments against it. But I would be surprised if the Democrats don't get this done.
We've got some other big issues still. We're waiting on votes on legalizing recreational marijuana. We've also got sports gaming and possibly expanded casino gaming out there as well, a capital bill. Any one of these things would be a huge lift in a typical session, but looking up, this is a big list.
Yeah, there is a lot of pent-up demand for things to happen because the last 4 years had a Republican governor in a constant battle with the Democratic legislature. You do have Democrats on all sides now. I think maybe the easiest thing, despite the fact that revenue is involved, is probably going to be a capital plan, roads, bridges, and then what they call vertical, building buildings for hospitals and colleges and universities. There is a great backlog of need, and even Republicans who are definitely anti-tax, generally speaking, definitely anti-progressive income tax, almost united. They say, we got to do something about capital. Everybody knows that the roads need work, bridges are getting in trouble all over the state, and you don't want that because people depend on those things at the most elemental level of government.
In terms of the horizontal, one thing we keep hearing about is the possibility of raising the gas tax on that. It hasn't been done for, almost 20 years, something like that?
Yeah.
That's not going to be popular.
It won't be popular. The governor, talks about that maybe with some other things. He won't have a mileage tax because that became a campaign issue, and he has shut the door on that again recently. But even the State Chamber of Commerce has a plan that would raise the state gasoline tax by 25 cents a gallon if other tax breaks are involved.
There's an offset on the other gas tax too.
Yeah, and they that's an organization that is often in line with Republicans, but they also know the value of good infrastructure, but also the jobs that will be created in producing, redoing roads and building new roads and bridges and those things. So basically the transportation system of the state. So you're going to get some bipartisan agreement. The gas tax might be a key part of that.
And you might see some of the sports gambling money. You might see some of the state's take on video slots and things like that go up a little bit.
Yeah.
About 30 seconds left.
Yeah, and of course there's opposition to everything. There has been talk that video gaming, which has become wildly popular in places including Springfield, where almost every bar and restaurant has games, that not enough is going back to the state. Of course, the operators say we've got to keep it where it is, so you're going to have those conflicts from here on through the end of May.
We're going to have a good time covering this. Bernie, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
You bet, Jack.
Up next on Illinois Lawmakers, look at how things are shaping up in the Illinois House of Representatives. We're heading into the stretch of the spring legislative session with just over 4 more weeks to go in the month of May. Here with an update from the Illinois House, Democratic House Majority Leader Greg Harris of Chicago and Assistant House Republican Leader Tom Demmer of Dixon. Good to have you both on the program again.
Thanks for having us.
Lots of stuff to talk about here as we start the month of May. Of course, the big news this week is the Senate on a party line vote sent the progressive income tax measure over here to the House. What's the fate of that bill over here?
House Democrats, fully support a fair tax. We believe it's time for the very wealthiest to pay their fair share. And we want to pass a tax proposal that will actually reduce the taxes for 97% of the tax-paying families in the state of Illinois, and also ask the wealthiest 2% to pay their fair share of running our state, providing for education, improving our colleges, and human services.
There were no Republican votes on that bill and series of bills in the House to actually, in the Senate to actually put that into place. All of the House Republicans are on record as saying we're not for this thing.
That's right. We've been opposed to this for the last couple of years. And I think as you look at what happened in the Senate, one of the important things comes out. What we've talked about is what voters are asked to weigh in on is just a provision that would remove the flat tax protection from the Constitution. The rates are a separate discussion. One of our criticisms has been the rates can change at any time. And in fact, in the Senate debate, you saw for the very first time those rates change already from the governor's introduced proposal to a separate set of rates that the Senate offered. And we think that's an open door and a blank check for the future.
They're a little higher than the governor's proposal. How's that? You've said there's a lot of moving parts to this thing as it comes over to the House chambers.
Sure. There's property tax relief included in this for families. There is a new income tax credit for families with children that will further reduce the burden. And as Representative Demmer said, in the Senate, they proposed raising the taxes higher on the very wealthiest people in the state of Illinois, but again, reducing taxes for 97% of the people in the state of Illinois. We'll look at those proposals. We'd love to work with the House Republicans on, crafting a different proposal if that's possible. But bottom line is, we can't use inaction as an excuse to keep a tax system in place that skews in favor of the wealthiest and of corporations.
So those bracket numbers could move around a little bit here as the House takes...
Well, the governor had a proposal that he made. The Senate made a change to it. It's up to the House now to decide what we wish to do.
One of the things that the Senate Democrats did that Republicans have been asking for quite a while was getting rid of the estate tax. That's been a major ask for Republicans for a long time here.
Yeah, it has, and I think we'd be willing to have conversations about how we can provide tax relief, but when it's tied up in a plan that says, as part of this plan, we're also going to open the door to any number of tax increases in the future, a set of rates that could change week to week, a set of rates that, may even change yet again when they come over here to the House. We feel like that's sort of a little bit of a bait and switch that says, hey, pay attention to this one area we might provide relief, but really open the door for a blank check in the future on income taxes that affect every single person in Illinois.
The flat tax can be moved up as well. It's not easy to do it. You don't do it very often around here.
Here is why the very wealthiest are paying for these dark money groups to oppose a fair tax. They want a flat tax because that means you would have to raise taxes on poor families, middle-class families, if you want to raise it on the very wealthiest. With a fair tax, you have the ability to raise it on those who have the greatest ability to pay and leave alone those who are working families, moderate income, and low income families.
But what's more likely to happen is you're likely to see those rates get tweaked up year after year. Maybe the income brackets start to drop a little bit. And I guarantee you the plan that is in place 10 years from now looks nothing like what people thought they were sold today.
Could there be safeguards built into this thing?
Sure, there can always be safeguards, and as Tom knows, the legislature has the authority to change tax rates flat or fair. We know that's the case. But again, we should not allow this to be used as a dark horse by the very wealthiest to be sure that we don't ask them to pay their fair share. Property
tax relief has always been a major component of these plans as they've been talked about for the last 25 years around this building. Anytime the income taxes go up, people want property tax relief. I think Caucus says we're now number 7th in the nation in terms of the amount of property taxes we pay, very high. How is this going to work for property tax relief the way that's come over from the Senate? As I understand, it has to do with a new school funding formula. For the first time, when we actually pay the amount that we're supposed to on that, there will be a measure of property tax relief added?
The governor had some property tax relief in his proposal. The Senate passed a plan which we had not seen that had a different approach on it. Property tax is really important for the House Democrats to get right. We'll look at both proposals. We'll analyze how they function and operate.
We know that the 41 House Republicans, the 41, right?
44.
44, pardon me. 44 House Republicans are against this. You have a 74 vote supermajority in the Illinois House. You need 71 to pass it. So only 3 of your colleagues might be able to take a pass on this. Do you have the numbers to pass it here?
Yeah, we're going to work through this with our caucus. Democrats uniformly believe that we should have a fair tax system that asks the wealthiest to pay their fair share of operating our state. But every member is different. Each one has a district to be accountable to, and we'll work through this and we'll get it passed.
Let's talk about some of the other things still we're waiting on. Recreational marijuana is one that was part of the governor's plank. There's significant support for it amongst the public, and it looks like it's got a fair amount of support here at the Capitol. When are we going to see some specifics on that?
I'm told that language will be filed soon by the sponsors. They're working through some last issues with all the different stakeholders, and we want to be sure that it is fair to communities, that it is fair to minority and women-owned enterprises, that there's a significant law enforcement protection aspect to it to protect the public. So I think those are the details that are being worked out.
What do Republicans want to see in this bill?
Well, I think we should be careful in this. This is a major step in public policy. We shouldn't be motivated solely by how much money is going to come into the state. As Representative Harris mentioned, this has a lot of impacts in law enforcement and different communities around the state and social service providers. We shouldn't get too distracted by the fact that there's revenue coming in. We should make a sound public policy.
We're going to talk more about that with the Senate sponsor of that measure in just a few minutes here on Illinois Lawmakers. But as my understanding of it is, the broad outlines of this, it would be restricted to people 21 years and older, no public consumption, so to speak. You wouldn't have it's going to have to be sold in dispensaries, things like that?
Those are the broad outlines. And again, a lot of details to be worked out. And as Leader Demmer said, we want to be sure that we're protecting public safety. We want to be sure that there are provisions for people who suffer from addiction, just like all substances we have problems with people smoking, we have problems with people who overconsume alcohol, and we need to invest in behavioral health services in the community to be sure that if people have trouble, that there's resources to help them.
Another potential source of revenue that the governor is hoping to have at his command as he puts together the budget is sports gaming. There are a number of proposals that the lead sponsor has put out there. What seems to be, has anyone had an opportunity to weigh in on those yet? What seems to be the best approach to your mind?
Well, in the Senate, they've said they don't want to pass sports wagering alone. They want to pass it in conjunction with casino gaming, and that adds another dimension of complication. I think sports wagering on its own, there's been a lot of negotiations. I hear they've gone well. Major league sports teams have been down and talked. The players have talked about protections they want. We've listened to casinos. We've listened to racetracks, OTBs. We've listened to law enforcement. That as a standalone bill, I think has fairly well come together. But now, if it gets attached to an issue of creating more land-based casinos in Illinois, that becomes a different dimension.
The land-based casinos bill has had a lot of bipartisan support, though, when I've talked to members here before.
Yeah, I think the casino expansion has had bipartisan support. There's regional pockets of support around communities that might get a casino from it. And I think there's also some concern from people who represent districts that already have casinos about whether there's an opportunity to relocate those or if there's some cannibalization that happens in the market. But I think it's a regional issue, maybe more than just a direct partisan issue.
One thing that Republicans and Democrats seem to agree on is the need for a capital bill. We haven't had one since the Quinn administration. How are talks proceeding on that, Representative Demmer?
I think there's a lot of bipartisan agreement that we need to make investments in the infrastructure around the state. That's something that people struggle with when they're hitting a pothole and it causes damage to their car, but it also has a huge impact on the business community to be able to move the goods that we're manufacturing and growing here in Illinois to markets around around the world. So I think you have to recognize it's both a public safety implication and economic development opportunity.
What about the revenue streams, Representative Harris?
Well, I think you're going to need to find two sets of revenue streams. One for the horizontal infrastructure, which is transportation in all its forms, like Tom mentioned, but also vertical, which would include replacing lead water pipes, new water systems, repairing our colleges and universities, building new facilities for them. It's going to be a question of the will of the legislature to vote for tax sources to pay for those things.
A lot of those are downstate projects. Are Republicans going to be counted on for some of those votes?
Yeah, Republicans are part of all those negotiations right now. You know, we know that these are never easy votes, but we want to make sure that there's that downstate Illinois gets the right amount of investment and that we're able to establish a pretty good line of accountability between the dollars we raise and the dollars we spend.
Got about 30 seconds left. Will higher gas taxes be part of that whole package?
I think gas taxes are likely to be a part of what finances the infrastructure component, but as Leader Harris mentioned, there's also another vertical component and a big question about where that financing will come from.
Gentlemen, thanks very much. Always good to have you on the program for your insights here in the Illinois House of Representatives. Coming up next, we'll dig a little deeper into that idea of legalizing recreational marijuana in the state of Illinois. Governor J.B. Pritzker is banking on lawmakers passing a bill to legalize recreational marijuana in his new budget. Here to discuss the pros and cons of the idea, Chicago Democratic Senator Heather Steans, the chief Senate author of the bill to legalize recreational marijuana in the state. Joining her, Republican Senate Caucus Chair Dale Ryder of Mattoon. Senator Ryder is a former drugs crimes prosecutor, so they come down on opposite sides on this. I think this might be the precursor of the rehearsal for the floor debate. Good to have you both here. Since you're on both sides of this, I'm going to give you an opportunity to kind of debate this. Senator, what is your case for legalizing recreational marijuana in the state of Illinois, and then rebuttal to Senator Ryder?
Okay. So about 800,000 people in Illinois use cannabis on a regular basis. Only about 50,000 people or so have medical cards. 95% are buying it on the illicit market right now. Prohibition just plain doesn't work. People are using it. When you legalize, you can actually make sure you're having a safe product that's purchased. We saw, for example, last summer, a whole rash of folks that were dying because of cannabis being laced with rat poison in it. There's no protections when you're buying it off the street. So you can make sure it's a safe product, and you can make sure that people 21 and under aren't getting access to it. What we've seen in states that have legalized is teen use stays the same or goes down. That's what we want in Illinois. People with developing brains should not use cannabis. I think you have a better chance of reducing that, like we've seen with tobacco and alcohol and driving use, go down when you have a tax regulate situation. And then finally, there's a big case for it on just plain the criminal justice aspect to it. We have a history, not just in Illinois, but nationally, of way over criminalizing it, particularly for minority groups. ACLU had done studies that 7 times more likely to arrest people for cannabis charges if you're black or brown than if you're Caucasian, even though usage rates are the same. So there's lots of work we can do in legalizing a tax structure, actually improving the sort of social inequities that have happened.
Senator Ryder, you've prosecuted these drug crimes at the appellate level, correct?
Yes, that's correct. First of all, Senator Steans is one of my most trusted and valued colleagues in the Senate, and one of the things I admire most about her is her optimism. I'm not sure that I share her degree of optimism with regards to how this will change the landscape, if you will, with regards to drug use or drug abuse. I mean, the notion that people are doing things outside the law, therefore if we just legalize it and tax it, things will be better. I mean, I'm concerned that logic could be extended into other areas. I'm not sure that that's appropriate. But I mean, let's speak to the direct issue. I mean, people smoke even though the smoking age, under 18, even though the smoking age is under 18. We shouldn't pretend that if we pass a law saying that you cannot use cannabis legally until you're 21, people will not use cannabis until they're 21 years of age. I think part of the problem in this debate, Jack, honestly, is that the narrative out there, the popular narrative, is that cannabis is relatively harmless, at least for adults. I mean, I think that's the narrative that's being perpetrated. The science would tend to differ with that. I mean, the American Journal of Medicine just published a study earlier this year that talks about there is a causal link not a casual link or not a coincidental link, but a causal link between the long-term use of cannabis and the development of psychosis, mental illnesses, including some of the most dangerous ones like schizophrenia. In this building right now, we're talking about how much to tax it, where should that money go, whether or not people should be allowed to grow plants in their home. I think we need to have a more serious conversation about the potential long-term effects of mental illness in our society. I think everyone would agree we have enough of that in our society. Do we want to promote more of that?
Senator Steans, you've been studying this for what, a good 3 years or more?
Yeah.
How does this bill build upon the experience of other states that have gone through this before Illinois?
So yes, we can learn from 10 other states have legalized cannabis, so we've been studying that, been going to states and visiting, and there's lots that we can do, I think, because of what we've learned from other states. For example, home grow has been a huge problem in the way they've done that in some other states where it's very hard to enforce. In Colorado, for example, you had a very high number of plants that you could home grow, and I could be assigned the caretaker for a whole bunch of people and have big warehouses that I was growing. Well, that's very hard to enforce for law enforcement. We can learn from that and do it very differently and have a limited number of 5 plants per household period that anybody could grow. Makes it much more contained kind of program. States have had problems when they did not regulate it very well in terms of dosages, so you knew exactly what you were getting in a product, particularly with an edible product. We can learn from that and make sure that every single, if you have, for example, a chocolate bar, it's all scored so you know what an individual dose is. You can limit how much THC can be in any single dose, those kinds of things. So you can really make sure you have safe products, which you don't get on the illegal market. And when you talk about kids under 21, nobody should want kids under 21 using it. It is not good for brain development. I think we all agree with that. Right now, 4 out of 5 teens say they have easy access to cannabis here in Illinois. I think we reduce teen access. It's really easy to buy it from a guy on the street corner. They're not checking your ID. We're going to have scanned in every single dispensary now. If you go to tax and regulate, you got to scan your ID and make sure you're in fact 21 years, and hopefully really reduce that and give kids good information about why they shouldn't be using.
One of the concerns I hear from law enforcement, Senator Ryder, is that although you wouldn't have these multiple growing rooms or whatever, they're still concerned about how you can make sure people are only growing 5 plants at a time.
And there should be concern, Jack. I mean, how are we going to know that people are only growing 5 plants? How are we going to know what the potency is of those plants? Senator Steans correctly points out that potency is an issue. This is not, as one constituent told me when I was home on break last week, this is not your grandfather's cannabis. The THC levels are much higher in today's street-level cannabis than they were in the 1980s or 1970s. How is that going to be regulated if you have home grow? How are you going to know how many plants, and how are you going to know that they're not selling? If we're going to allow home grow, then how are the police going to regulate that in terms of potency, how many plants, and whether or not those people are choosing to sell, which perpetuates the illegal market?
Senator Steans, what about safeguarding that?
A couple things. One, right now, people can be doing that. So you have the same issues that law enforcement they have today that they will have tomorrow. And this is generally the case, I think, that can be a lot of myths about this. If people are home growing right now, we have the same ability to law enforce tomorrow if they do today. Now you, in fact, can say, you can go in, same reasons if you think it's doing and somebody's doing an illegal grow, the law enforcement will still be able to go in and do it. You can see whether they have the 5 plants. There's only so much potency you can get into a plant. The real issues you have with potency are non-plant products, and you can't regulate that right now when it's an illicit market. You can much better regulate this, and we're putting that in the bill, the ability to set THC limits. We can do that when you tax and regulate. You can't do that on the illegal market. So you have the ability to, in fact, shape and make sure you're getting safer products when you do it this way.
Some of the other aspects of this, technically, you would be buying this from dispensaries, correct?
Correct.
And who's going to get those licenses under this bill?
Right now, under the medical program, we have 20 cultivation centers, which are the grow operations, and we have 65 licenses available. 55 have been issued. So there's 55 dispensaries around the state right now. Obviously, that would grow in numbers of dispensaries we have if we pass the adult use.
If that's passed this session, between now and May 31st, when would we see the first products available at the dispensaries?
The timing we're looking at is that we would have start being able to purchase adult use cannabis January 1st, 2020.
Senator Ryder, I was at a regional Chamber of Commerce meeting last week, and it was large employers like Southern Illinois Healthcare, Southern Illinois University. One of the concerns that was brought up is, how are we going to deal with this at work? Some of these places, like universities, have drug-free workplace regulations from the federal government.
And that's a great question, and I think that that's one of the number of very serious questions that the authors of the bill are going to have to figure out with the business community. I want to go back to the issue of the home grow and law enforcement. This is one of the trick bags that the proponents are in. On one hand, the suggestion is that if we legalize this and regulate this and tax this, then the legal behavior goes away. But if you allow home grow, the illegal behavior continues, because, as they readily admit, you can't regulate what someone is doing in their own home. Now, is that problem exist today? Yes, but if it's still going to exist tomorrow, you really can't make the case that you're making things way better here, because people are still going to be doing that.
Senator Steans?
I want to also speak to the question about what happens with the employers. We have been working with the Illinois Chamber of Commerce, IRMA, IMA. We think that those groups are likely to be neutral, because we're going to maintain drug-free workplace ability. So any workplace can, in fact, maintain a drug-free workplace environment. We think that's important. We want to maintain that. That's the case under the medical program, and we'll keep that in place going forward if we do adult use.
Last I heard, the bill, one version was about 300 pages. When are we actually going to see this thing drop in the House and Senate?
We have changes right now into LRB. We just need to be getting them back. It'll be soon. It's a question of days, not weeks.
I see. Senator Steans, Senator Ryder, thanks very much. A good preview of what we're going to hear on the Senate floor.
And I should add, too, in the debates, that he is also one of my favorites, and truly trust, and I look forward to the debates.
I think she felt like she had to say that.
No,
I
it's
said it first,
absolutely, genuinely true.
I can say two of my
He knows
favorite,
it.
two of my favorite guests on Illinois Lawmakers. Thanks both. I appreciate
Thank you,
it.
Jack.
Senator Steans, Senator Ryder, great. That's it for this week's edition of Illinois Lawmakers. We'll be back next week here on your local PBS station. Thanks for watching.